Maybe you've been luckier in love than I was, because what I share in this video is not something I read in books. It's what I lived through. I once loved someone with all my heart, enough to let go of social norms, judgments, and expectations. In the beginning, we were happy. I was proud of the love we had, but over time, I started to notice. My words weren't being heard the same way. My joys, my struggles, they began to vanish in their silence. I started raising my voice, picking at the past, clinging to promises that no longer felt real. At first, they tried to comfort, to keep the peace, but something had changed. Their gestures, their tone, even their silence, it no longer felt like love. I was breaking, and I knew I had to stop that, so I let go. We said goodbye. I lost the love I had built so carefully, but I gained something more sacred, their respect and my peace. Looking back now, I realize trying to force a fallen leaf back onto a tree only breaks you more. If I had stayed, I would have lost not just the relationship, but my dignity down. So, if you've ever loved deeply and felt it slip through your hands, this video is for you. Let me show you the 2 quiet signs that love is fading before it breaks you. Let's feel this together. Love doesn't always leave with a storm. Sometimes it vanishes like mist under morning light, soft, quiet, and unnoticed until you reach out and realize there's nothing left to hold. That we often think that when love fades, it must be loud. It must be painful. It must look like betrayal or anger, but the truth? Love often disappears through indifference, not cruelty. It doesn't always roar, it whispers. And those whispers are easy to miss unless you're brave enough to truly listen. The person still looks the same. Their voice still sounds familiar, but something feels missing. The warmth that once lived in the space between you now feels forced. The connection, once effortless, is suddenly hard work, and the scariest part, you don't know when the shift happened or why. People rarely say, "I don't love you anymore." They just stop showing it. Not because they're trying to hurt you, but because feelings change, attention drifts, and hearts move on. Not with rage, but with silence, with indifference. And somehow that is even harder to face. Have you ever felt invisible while still being seen? Physically present, but emotionally erased? Like a ghost haunting a relationship that once felt like home? There's no goodbye, no clear moments of breakage, just a quiet unraveling, a soft undoing. One day you're laughing together, the next your conversations are hollow. One day their eyes light up when they see you, the next they barely look at you at all. The Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius once said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." And that is the key. Because when someone begins to emotionally withdraw, it's not their distance that hurts us the most. It's our resistance to that distance. We cling to how things used to be. We grasp at memories like lifelines, even as the reality slips further out of reach. Today, we dive into a quiet truth, one that isn't always easy to face. When love begins to leave, it reveals itself in 2 ways. Not loudly, not cruelly, but clearly. If you're willing to see it to understand these 2 signs, we need to step away from noise, from logic, from desperate overthinking, and step into a story. A story about a man named Elias. And the sound of falling leaves in a peaceful village nestled between tall green hills and open fields. Like quiet sighs across the land, there lived a humble farmer named Elias. He wasn't a man of many words or grand ambitions. His joy came from simplicity, rising with the sun, planting with patience, working with care. But most of all, his joy came from returning home each evening. To her, her name was Liana, his wife, his home. his entire world. Their life wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. Shared glances over warm soup, laughter in the garden. The kind of silence between two people that feels comforting, not cold. The kind of quiet where you don't need to speak to feel connected. Years passed, and the seasons painted their faces with age. But Elias believed their hearts remained unchanged. That love, once rooted, stayed firm, until one autumn, when everything changed, and it didn't happen with a scream or betrayal. It came with a colder stare, a shorter answer, a silence that started to echo louder each day. He noticed Liana no longer waited for him at the door. The meals were made but not shared, left on the table untouched. She no longer asked about his day, nor offered much about hers. At first, Elias thought it was fatigue, the changing season, maybe just stress. But as the leaves fell outside, so too did their connection. Her eyes wandered, though not far, and her mind seemed adrift in thoughts that no longer included him. He tried to bring her back, to remind her of what they once shared. He brought home her favorite bread from the market, tended their garden with extra care, even read aloud her favorite poem by candlelight. But her smiles felt rehearsed soft, polite, distant, as though she was watching a stranger, pretending to be her husband. Elias said nothing, not to the neighbors, not even to his brother in a nearby village. Instead, one early morning, he packed a small bag and walked into the forest toward silence, toward stillness, toward the only place he'd heard might offer understanding. Deep within the woods, beyond the reach of sunbeams and noise, there lived an old man known only as the Watcher. He wasn't a priest, not a prophet, just a man who had once loved. Once lost, and now lived alone in stillness. People came not to ask questions, but to remember how to see. Elias found him seated outside a small wooden cottage, watching the leaves fall from the trees like forgotten memories. The Watcher didn't speak. He simply nodded toward the bench beside him. They sat, in silence, and watched the trees let go. Finally, Elias spoke, his voice barely more than a whisper. I think she no longer loves me, but I cannot prove it. Elias's voice trembled with quiet truth. She is still there, but it feels like I am alone. The Watcher didn't rush to answer. He simply nodded slowly, deliberately, like someone who had seen seasons change many times and knew better than to fight the wind. When the wind changes, the Watcher said, his gaze still fixed on the rustling trees ahead. The leaves fall. He let the words settle. They don't ask permission. They don't explain themselves. They don't resist. They simply fall, because the season has ended. And they know. Elias lowered his eyes, the silence between them thick with things left unsaid. So, what do I do? He asked quietly, his voice laced with desperation. How can I know for certain? The Watcher didn't speak at once. Instead, he reached beside him and picked up a brittle leaf from the bench. It was faded, crumbling at the edges, its color drained, its life already gone. He held it up gently between two fingers. Love doesn't leave with loud footsteps, he said. It doesn't slam the door or shout its exit. It fades, quietly, like the green of this leaf. First the edges, then the color, and then, without warning, it detaches. He paused and let the wind carry the silence between them. There are always signs, he added, but they are not shouted. They are whispered. Then he stood slowly and walked toward the tallest tree at the edge of the clearing. Its wide limbs stretched out like arms open to the sky, yet nearly bare, each branch surrendering what it no longer needed. This tree, the Watcher said, his hand resting on the bark, has stood longer than I've been alive. Every year, Hey, let's go. Not out of anger, not out of sorrow, but out of wisdom. Elias followed him, his eyes tracing the gentle swaying of the upper branches, each one letting go of leaves that once belonged to it, without grief, without hesitation. You want to know if love has left you? The watcher asked, then listen. He turned to Elias, his expression calm, grounded. Do not force her to speak. Do not demand clarity from someone who cannot find clarity in their own heart. Just watch. He took Elias's hand and gently placed the brittle leaf into his palm. When the time comes, you won't need to ask, he said. You'll already know. In that quiet clearing, surrounded by trees letting go of what they no longer needed, Elias stood motionless. And in that stillness, he understood something he had never dared to believe. Love, like all things in nature, has its seasons. And when someone begins to drift away from you, the world doesn't scream. It whispers that it speaks in cold mornings that used to be warm. It appears in the empty space beside you that used to feel full. It hides inside the small absences, the skipped questions, the missing laughter, the moments when silence grows loud. What remains, the watcher explained, is not the fight to hold on to, love, but the strength to witness its change. To stand still while everything familiar transforms, and to see with eyes wide open the signs. Because in the early falling of love, there are always two signs, not sometimes. Not occasionally, always. And the first, it's not something they say. It's what they stopped saying. After Elias returned to the village, things seemed unchanged on the surface. Liana was still there. She cooked. She cleaned. She asked about the crops. But something essential, something unseen was gone. And now, after everything he'd learned in the forest, Elias could finally hear what had always been there. Silence. Not the peaceful kind they once shared, but a colder, lonelier kind. Kind that fills the space between two people like a fog. Their conversations were no longer woven with thoughts, dreams, or tender asides. They were efficient, short, safe. She spoke to him not like a lover, but like a distant roommate. Her voice carried no secrets. Not because she was hiding something, but because she had stopped letting him in. Elias remembered the evenings they used to spend by the fire, talking for hours about nothing and everything, their fears, their hopes, the tiny details of the day that made them feel more alive, more connected. Now, she answered questions with a nod, told him what he needed to know. Nothing more. It wasn't hostility. It wasn't anger. It was retreat. One evening, Elias tried to revive the warmth. He asked her, softly, what made you smile today? She looked puzzled for a moment, as if caught off guard by the question. Then she shrugged. Nothing in particular, she replied flatly. And just like that, the moment passed. The room grew colder. It felt like knocking on a door that used to be wide open and finding it locked, with no reason, no explanation. When someone stops sharing their inner world with you, it doesn't always mean they're hiding something. Often, it means they no longer feel the need to bring you inside it. The connection that once flowed in both directions becomes one-sided. You reach in, and nothing reaches back. It's not loud, it's not violent, but it is unmistakable. The watcher had spoken of this too. He called it the closing of the gate. Each person, he said, carries a garden inside them, a place of memories, emotions, and dreams. To love someone is to be invited into that garden, to walk its paths, to care for its beauty, to tend to it with presence and tenderness. But when love begins to fade, the gate doesn't slam shut. It closes slowly, silently, not with arguments, not with final words, but with absence. Elias saw it now. She still poured him tea, still looked at him, still slept beside him. But she no longer brought him her joys, her frustrations, her questions, her wonderings. She was still in the same room, but she was no longer in the same world. And that was the first sign. Liana was still there, present in form, polite in habit, but Elias could now see it clearly. She had quietly closed the gate. Her heart, once open and warm, had gone somewhere he could no longer follow. And the silence spoke volumes. She no longer told him about her day. No small stories about who came to the well. No mentions of what flower had bloomed near the garden fence. No questions about his work, his thoughts, or his tired shoulders after harvest. Details, those little pieces of her life she once rushed to share, were now left unsaid. And it wasn't out of malice or secrecy. It was because somewhere deep inside, his presence no longer felt essential to her inner world. She didn't hide anything. She simply stopped inviting him in. Elias could see it now. She smiled at him when appropriate. She poured him tea in the mornings, but her gaze drifted. Her thoughts wandered to places he was no longer welcome. He noticed that the little sparks, the joys, the annoyances, the soft sighs at the end of a long day no longer reached him. They stayed with her, tucked away, and that, more than anything, told him what he needed to know. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus once said, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak." But what happens when there's nothing left to listen to? What do you do when the person you love no longer gives you access to their inner life? When the silence isn't peaceful but empty? The answer, though painful, is simple. You accept it. According to Stoicism, suffering does not come from the event itself, but from our judgment of it. It's not the silence that hurts. It's our belief that they should still speak, that they must continue to let us in, that we somehow deserve continued access to a place that was once shared, but no longer is. But the truth is this: we do not own another person's inner world. We are only ever guests there. And when the invitation is withdrawn, the wise thing is not to demand to stay, not to shake the gate, not to break down the door, but to bow quietly and walk away with dignity. So Elias began to speak less, not out of coldness, not to punish her, but out of understanding. He stopped asking questions that would only be answered with indifference. He no longer reached for warmth in places where only routine remained. He let the silence be. And in that silence, he listened not to what was said, but to what was no longer said. In that quiet observation, Elias finally saw the truth. This was the first sign. When love begins to fade, it is not the voice that grows louder. It is the voice of the heart that grows quiet. They no longer share their fears. They no longer offer their hopes. They no longer speak their soul. You may still be part of their life, but no longer part of their thoughts. And once you no longer reside in someone's inner world, their outer actions will soon begin to reflect it. The first leaf has fallen. The garden gate has closed. And then came the second sign. It happened on ordinary afternoon. The kind that once held comfort in shared steps and mutual rhythms. They were walking through the village market just as they used to. In the past, their movements had cinched like breath, stopping at the same stalls, laughing at odd-shaped vegetables, choosing herbs together, but not this time. This time, Liana's eyes wandered not to the spices, not to the produce, but to people, strangers, couples, lives she wasn't part of, but couldn't stop observing. Elias noticed her gaze linger on a young couple near the baker's shop. They were laughing, playful, full of ease. Her expression didn't change. There was no envy, no overt sadness, just quiet observation. The kind of look one gives something that used to feel familiar, but now feels distant. Later that evening, as they passed the well, she casually mentioned another woman's dress. A small comment, barely more than a breath. But something in her tone pierced deeper than any insult ever could. It wasn't what she said. It was what Elias felt in the pause that followed. He was being compared, measured, and found lacking. She never said it aloud. She didn't have to. Every glance away from him, every moment her eyes lit up for someone else, every admiration, silent or whispered, cut sharper than criticism. The Watcher had warned of this. He once told Elias the story of a man who carved a statue of his wife sculpted lovingly from memory. But over time, he began to add new features. A more elegant smile, a straighter back, softer eyes. He claimed it was still her. But what he had created was no longer the woman he knew. It was an ideal, a fiction, something she could never live up to. This is what comparison does. It replaces real connection with imagined perfection. It shifts the gaze from what's shared to what's missing, from gratitude to longing. And it always begins quietly. You hear it in the way they talk about others. You see it in the way their eyes shine at someone else's story. But go dim when you speak. It's in the way they start seeing you not as their choice, but as their habit. Elias saw it now. In how Liana no longer reached for his hand in public. In how her smile was brighter for strangers than for him. And how her admiration now belonged to things he could never become. There's a deep kind of pain in being measured without being told, in standing next to someone who no longer sees you, in being near someone who's already imagining someone else. Elias no longer needed words to know the truth. Each glance that didn't linger, each smile offered to others instead of him, each silent moment they used to fill together, now left empty, confirmed what he feared. He was no longer her choice, but merely her habit. As Marcus Aurelius once wrote, be content to seem what you really are. But what happens? When the person you love is no longer content with who you are, their discontent doesn't arrive in arguments. It doesn't shout in frustration or rage. It creeps in quietly like a restless wind brushing through a still room. It shows up in the smallest things, in glances that no longer land, in sighs between words, in the silence that now lives between you. Elias noticed it in every space they entered together. In the way Liana no longer reached for his hand when others were watching. In the way her eyes lit up at someone else's story, but dimmed when he spoke. In the way she admired things, lives, people, possibilities that he could never offer her, even if he tried. And she never said a word. But she didn't have to. There's a particular pain in being compared without ever being told. It's the ache of being seen, but not truly seen. Of being near someone who is already imagining someone else. The Stoics teach us not to chase what lies beyond our control. And one of the most uncontrollable forces in this world is another person's heart. That we cannot stop someone from comparing us to others. But we can choose not to compare ourselves. In return, we can choose to accept that love, when built on comparison, is no longer love at all. It becomes performance. And we are not performers. We are not here to audition for affection. Because the moment someone begins to quietly compare, they stop seeing you as enough. They search for what you lack. And in doing so, they forget everything you already are. This, Elias knew now, was the second sign. The heart no longer looks inward into what it shares, into what it treasures. Instead, it turns outward toward what it doesn't have, toward imagine better. Elias didn't confront Liana. He didn't cry or raise his voice or beg her to love him the way she used to. He simply observed, and in that quiet observation, he saw clearly she was still there in body, but her spirit, it had already begun to walk away. Love begins with admiration. But when that admiration is redirected, when it finds new places to land. It doesn't always leave you for someone else. Sometimes it just fades. And the most painful part is not being replaced. It's being slowly forgotten while still standing right in front of the person you love, because the second leaf doesn't fall with a fight. It doesn't fall with a decision. It falls with a gaze that no longer sees you. After days, perhaps. Weeks of watching, waiting, and saying nothing, Elias found himself walking back to the forest. The same path. The same crunch of leaves beneath his feet. The same clearing where wisdom lived in silence. The watcher was there, seated on the same bench, his gaze fixed once again on the trees, still shedding what they no longer needed. Elias joined him, the weight of stillness pressing heavy on his chest. "I've seen the signs," he finally said, voice low but steady. "She doesn't share herself with me anymore, and I feel her comparing me to things I can never become. So, what should I do now?" The watcher said nothing at first. He simply bent down, gathered a handful of fallen leaves, and let them fall slowly from his hand one by one. Each leaf floated, caught in the breeze, drifting gently to the ground. "You cannot chase the wind," he said softly. "And you cannot force a leaf to cling to a branch that no longer feeds it." Elias looked down, his voice barely audible. "Should I fight for her? Should I ask her to stay?" The watcher turned to him, his tone firm but not unkind. "You can ask," he said. "You can cry. You can name every ache in your chest. But if her heart has already walked away, your words will not reach her. You won't be speaking to her. You'll be speaking to the memory of who she once was." That, he added, is the great sorrow of love. Not that it ends, but that we keep trying to hold on, long after it's already gone. Teachings remind us that true strength lies not in resistance, but in acceptance. Epictetus once said, "Freedom is the only worthy goal in life." And it is achieved by letting go of what is outside our control. You cannot control how someone feels. You cannot force love to return. You cannot make someone stay if their spirit has already left. But there is one thing far more powerful that you can control: yourself. Elias sat still, his eyes on the forest floor. "How do I do that?" he asked. The watcher's reply was calm, unwavering, by not begging for attention, by not lowering your worth to chase what no longer sees it, by standing where you are and choosing peace over pride. When someone begins to leave, do not chase them into the darkness. Let them go. And if they return, let it be by choice, not guilt. If they do not, then you will still be standing, whole, undiminished. The greatest mistake, the watcher said, is believing that letting go means you didn't care. But the truth is the opposite. Letting go means you cared enough not to trap what wanted to fly. It means you loved deeply, but chose truth over fantasy. Elias asked quietly, "So, what should I do tomorrow?" And the watcher, looking once more toward the drifting trees, answered, "You rise. You water your field. You greet the sun. You care for your life because it is still yours, even if someone else has stepped out of it. Let them go, Elias. But do more than just let go. Choose yourself. Choose to live fully. Choose to build a future that doesn't depend on someone else's heart." The watcher's words still echoed in Elias's chest. Choose yourself. Stand where you are, and let what wants to leave, leave. He did not return home with clenched fists or accusations burning on his lips. He didn't storm through the doorway or sit her down for one last plea. No. Elias walked back into his life with something else entirely. A quiet clarity. A calm not born from answers, but from release. He still rose with the sun, as he had always done. Still brushed dust from his boots, watered his crops, fed the animals. But there was something different in his step lighter, less expectant. He no longer looked toward the path each morning, hoping to feel warmth in her footsteps. He no longer searched Liana's face for remnants of the love they once knew. He had stopped waiting. He had started accepting, and in that surrender, something powerful emerged, a new kind of stillness. Not the stillness of numbness or resignation, but the stillness of someone who has come home to themselves. One cold morning, with frost silvering the edges of the grass, Elias paused at the edge of his land. He looked out across the fields, noticing how the trees had lost almost all their leaves. The sky was clear, the air sharper. The season had moved on, and so had he. He caught his own reflection in the glass pane of their cottage window. But what he saw staring back was no longer the image of a man abandoned. No. He saw a man who had chosen not to abandon himself. Because love doesn't always end in heartbreak. Sometimes it simply transforms into memory, into wisdom, into something quieter. And even when it fades, it leaves something behind. A deeper knowing of who we are, what we need, and what we must never lose again. The Stoics teach that we do. Not own anything, not people, not possessions, not even the feelings we desperately hope will stay. All we truly have is the moment. The power to respond to life with reason, the strength to let go with grace. And Elias, he had finally learned that letting go is not weakness. It's the highest expression of courage. Letting go means trusting life. Trusting that what leaves you does not determine your value. That what fades does not define what remains. In that quiet knowing, he found something even greater than closure. He found peace. He did not walk away in sorrow. He did not walk away in defeat. He walked forward in truth. Now I ask you, have you seen these signs in your own life? Have you felt someone slowly close the door of their inner world? Have you sensed the weight of silent comparison? The ache of being measured in someone's mind without ever being told? If you have, you are not alone. We have all stood in that hushed space torn between holding on and setting free, between fear and dignity, between fantasy and truth. Now, take a moment, pause, reflect. You don't need to tell the world. But maybe today you need to tell yourself that you were brave enough to notice, that you were wise enough to stop chasing, that you are still here and still whole, or maybe you're still in the middle of it, still reaching for answers, still unsure whether letting go is strength or surrender. That's okay too. You're invited to share your story. Not just for yourself, but for the next soul who finds this video, needing a quiet reminder that they are not walking this alone. Write a comment, share your truth. Be the voice that helps someone else hear their own. Because wisdom doesn't live in perfect answers. It lives in shared experience and lived reflection. In courageous vulnerability, remember this: love is not a possession, it is a presence. It cannot be kept, but it can be honored. And sometimes the most sacred way to honor love is to let it go. If this story resonated with your heart, if it brought you peace, clarity, or simply a quiet companion for your thoughts, subscribe to Stoic Havenway. We share more than ideas. We walk alongside you in the unseen moments, reflection, strength, and stillness. Click subscribe, tap the bell, and stay with us as we explore more stories that help us grow, not louder, but deeper. Let this channel be your quiet place, your inner bench beneath the autumn trees. A place to remember who you are and who you never have to become to be loved. Welcome home.